Let's begin with talking about the economic ramifications of this war in Iran.
And it's a very 340, 50 million people spread out. So it's much more integrated in the day-to-day life. Heating oil, luckily, I think we're near the end of winter, right? So you should see demand ease up. But then if we have a hot summer, right, heating oil also is used in power production, cooling. So
Yep.
at least in terms of timing, I think it's not going to be as bad, but I do think you're going to see restrictions on supply as inventories are run down. And again, I go back to aviation fuel. I think that I saw some figures that the Eurozone is okay for about a month, but then after that, supplies are going to be restricted.
So if you're thinking about booking a plane trip, do it now, because tickets prices are going to skyrocket soon. So I'd book that now and lock that in at current prices, which will be reasonable by comparison to what's going to come.
Restricted because the refining in the Middle East had a heavy emphasis on aviation fuel. So,
What about gas? Because of course in Europe we are very heavily dependent on gas.
Gas, that one's going to be big.
Gas reserves are
But it's really going to hit next winter. It'll hit a little bit before then, but next winter, ooh.
they're not at a critical level, but they're at a low level because we had a relatively cold winter, and supplies have not been perhaps quite as strong as one would like, and we do burn through quite a lot of gas in the summer. Again, it varies from place to place, but we do burn through gas, and in Britain, in particular, we are very vulnerable to shifts in.
Yeah. Europe is going to be devastated by this Iran war, the energy consequences. Because not only have they cut themselves off from Russia, now they're cut off from the Middle East. But many commentators have mentioned, and I absolutely agree with, it's not going to be long before Trump imposed restrictions on gas exports from the United States in order to keep prices down. I mean, you have midterms coming up. It's going to happen for sure. So U.S., Russia, and the Middle East are now gone. All Europe's primary gas suppliers in the past. And it's you're going to see heating bills that are through the roof. Oh my God, the energy crisis in Europe is going to be devastating.
The price of gas, because we don't have much gas storage here at all. We usually run with gas storage of about 2 to 3 days of gas.
Just 2 to 3 days. The just-in-time mentality that all the West adopted, and it was just to let you know, the just-in-time in manufacturing and gas supplies and everything in the West, it was done as a short-term play by policymakers, whatever, to bring down inflation. Like if you have big gas storages in a country, and then you say, oh, we're just going to have just in time because, you know, the world's now interconnected. We don't need source of supply anymore. And now you release those storage supply over a few months, then that lowers energy prices while you're doing that. Lowers inflation. It's a short-term boost to your economy at the cost of being unprepared for a shock like the Iran war later.
So.
Look, it's hard for me to sugarcoat things. I think the Eurozone is in a very particularly tough spot, right? Because you know, beautiful history, great culture, not a lot of natural resources to satisfy demand. Cutting off the Russian supply,
Yep.
Again, has knock-on effects, and now Middle East had taken up a lot of that slack, and you have the force majeure announcements out of Qatar, which is going to impact. They've already said Italy is one of the areas that they're not going to be able to supply. So, from an industrial point of view, from a cooling point of view, from an infrastructure point of view, I think the Eurozone is
fucked.
Particularly dependent on the U.S. And if I can tell you, Alexander, if prices at the pump are up 50%, you're getting close to the Biden highs. And Trump, I don't think, would be able to politically stomach that. And again, export restrictions,
Yep, that's coming. Absolutely guaranteed. This is a year where this is critically important for Trump midterms, and he's gonna, yeah, there'll be export restrictions on gas and oil.
don't want to say price caps because that certainly didn't work out very well for the U.S. in the 70s, but other mechanisms to try to keep consumer prices down in the U.S. So
Ban on exports of a certain oil and LNG definitely it would be a way in the short term to lower prices in the U.S. And Trump will do it.
I think the Eurozone is in a
He has no choice if he wants to have any hope in the midterms. But even then, prices will be boosted up because U.S. imports everything from abroad. And he might be able to keep energy prices down, like gas and oil, but he can't keep the price of goods coming in down because other countries, if their energy prices explode, they're going to push those prices onto the United States.
very difficult position.
I'm going to tell you something, Ray, which is that back in 2022, when we first had the restrictions on imports of gas into the EU, Alex and I, we actually did a program in which we floated the possibility that there might be an energy crisis and that the United States might impose restrictions on exports. Of course, that was a way out thing to say then. It's now
It's not a way out thing to say now. Now you have a complete energy crisis in the world and you have midterm elections. And Trump knows if Democrats win, they'll impeach him. So he will put import restrictions. He's just not doing it yet because we haven't gotten to that point. But he will because this is going on for at least another month. And I'll show you why in a bit.
being denied. I read an article in the Financial Times which said that it's not going to happen. That not that it's not going to happen. That the industry was saying that it shouldn't happen. And
The industry, of course, doesn't want it to happen because industry wants to sell gas and oil at the highest price possible. And if the international markets are skyrocketing, it wants to sell at those skyrocketing prices. Export restrictions in the United States would not be good for oil and gas companies based in the United States.
officials within the administration were saying that it won't happen, which makes me think that it is actually being considered. Is that what your
Yes,
take?
it is.
Alexander, I had the same thoughts, right? If you look at historically, the U.S. for more years than not, we've only changed the laws recently about exporting energy to keep prices lower, right? And I will say the administration, whether it be here or in Israel, has been very adamant about trying to calm down the markets. It's almost done. It's an excursion. It's not a war. So
Yes, that's another reason why Trump isn't doing it yet. It's not gone that bad yet. It's only been 3 weeks. And putting export restrictions, when they do that, that'll be a big step up. It'll frighten a lot of people. It'll be a sign that Trump doesn't think this is ending soon. That's the biggest thing. If Trump right now went out and say, okay, we're putting restrictions on the export of U.S. LNG and oil, what everyone will ask, well, he's told us this would end in like 3-4 weeks, and now it's a week 3. You mean it's not going to end in a week? I mean, if it's just going to end in under a month, why bother with these export restrictions? It's a thought that'll go through everyone's mind. So that's why he's going to delay doing that, because it's a mission that the Iran war has no quick solution. So, but once gas and oil prices get high enough, he will do it because he needs to win the midterms, and that'll be an attempt to do that.
they're trying to say things to calm down. If they were to say, yeah, that's something we're looking at, I think you'd see people would rush to fill up tanks as quickly as they can, and then have a quicker demand spike than they can really handle.
Of course, that's what happens. When people anticipate a shortage, they stock up. Countries, individuals, companies, that's how they work. And so a big part of this is why Trump is going out there saying we've won, this will be over soon, is to keep fears down, to try to discourage people from stocking up and making the situation even worse.
So I do think that it is something that's being considered. Look, if they're considering the draft, absolutely they'd consider energy export restrictions.
Oh, that's an excellent point, by the way.
Trump instituting the draft would be political suicide in this election year with midterms coming up. So I don't think that is happening. But the fact that they're even considering it shows you how fucked the situation is in Iran. Okay, so that's a little bit on that. Then I wanted to go in that this is pretty impressive.
What we have seen is Diego Garcia has been attacked by Iranian missiles. Why is this important, and what does this tell us? Well, this is very telling. Now,
So here's Diego Garcia, right here. And Iran just launched 2 missiles towards it. Iran is over here. Huge distance. Huge. And one missile, I think, fell short. The other one was shot down, apparently. But wow. What a... They have long range
might get a
capability.
few weeks. So Iran can wear down some of the surrounding air defense before we see more high-tech systems enter the battlefield. We didn't make that up. It's what we saw in the 12-day war. This could be what we're seeing. Maybe we are seeing a radar system being able to track that F-35 with the strike that we saw. Potentially these systems we hadn't seen for the first 22 days. Now we are seeing them. It tells us a lot. It tells us about a lot about...
It also tells us the fact that, you'll see later in video, Saudis have given United States permission to use a different airbase or airstrip for their planes because the U.S. airbase and airstrip is now so damaged it's not really usable. And you have the U.S. talking about using air bases in Romania. You have U.S. using air bases here. It's because U.S. military infrastructure in the Gulf is being degraded, and so they're having to operate from infrastructure even farther out. That's what's happening here. Another story, moving right along.
Get them by the balls, and
This is why Trump is thinking about going after Karg Island. He wants an off-ramp. He wants an exit. He wants the Strait of Hormuz open. Like, he thought he could just bomb Supreme Leader and walk away. But then Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now he's stuck in this conflict. And he's probably, I know what's happened. I could just imagine. He's demanded to his military officials, how do we reopen the straits? That's all I want. Reopen the straits. And this is the best solution they've come up with. We take Karg Island, and then we use that as leverage to force them to reopen the straits. Now, the reason they're going with this is the Strait of Hormuz here. It's a nightmare to reopen this. You need to take the entire coastline, basically. And we just don't have juice for that. And even if we did, they take like 6 months, no, probably 9, 10 months, and maybe a draft to get the right number of troops to take this area. So instead, he's going after Karg Island here, which is isolated by itself. This is much more realistic option, he feels, and his military planners no doubt feel. Just conquering this one little island versus conquering the entire Iranian coastline around the Strait of Hormuz. So they figured, we'll get Karg Island, and then we can use that as leverage to force open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we'll get into that's not going to work, and we'll get into that in a bit. But that is what the U.S. is planning.
use it for negotiations. So saying, well, we've got Karg Island. If you reopen the strait, we'll give it back. Is that what is it supposed to be?
That's the idea.
Hostage situation? I'm not quite sure. Another person described as a senior administration official said this. Trump wants Hormuz open. If he has to take Karg Island to make it happen, that's going to happen. If he decides to have a coastal invasion, that's going to happen. But that decision hasn't been made. So this is kind of...
Yeah, because it'll be politically costly. You'll have probably hundreds of U.S. deaths if he decides to take Karg Island, because this is the era of drone warfare. But the cost of keeping the straits closed is even greater for Trump, so he'll be desperate enough to do this. He's already been desperate enough to hit Iran's oil infrastructure, like its LNG plant, which immediately triggered an Iranian response and the bombing of Qatar's LNG plant. And so he's understood that he can't just bomb Iran's energy infrastructure into the ground, because Iran would just bomb all oil infrastructure in the Gulf into the ground, and then it won't matter if the Strait of Hormuz is open or not. So he can't do that. So this is his Hail Mary pass to get the Strait of Hormuz open. It won't work. So this here is about the airports.
Today, we received the reports that Saudi Arabia allowed the United States of America to use Prince Sultan bin Abdulaziz International Airport, so this territory.
So this is like letting the U.S. military use a civilian airport. Now, why would the United States need to use this airport for its planes? Well, that's probably because its air bases and their runway and infrastructure has now been decimated, so they can't operate out of their normal U.S. air bases. So that's why Saudi Arabia has given them permission to use this air base right here. And also, notice this air base.
For the reports,
Look how far it is. Where it
established
zooms in.
control over both straits physically. For example, today we received the report.
So all the way over here. So U.S. is being forced out of its air bases like Qatar and over here, and being forced to use air bases further and further away from Iran. That's hurting the ability of the United States to bomb Iran, because it's longer trips back and forth. It means it's less sorties, less bombs dropped. And that's not even counting what's going on with Iranian air defenses, which might have gotten a big upgrade in the last few days. And that might be why an F-35 fighter jet was shot down. We'll get into that in a little bit. But, Also, since we're on the topic of airplanes and air bases,
the United States is trying to compensate using AWACS planes that provide some of the radar coverage, but they lost us.
in other words, we talked about yesterday that somebody mentioned that there were planes flying around constantly. Yes, they're because all long-range radars in the Gulf have been taken out. They're flying planes, these planes with radars to try to track incoming threats to compensate for that. It's a patchwork, not great solution. And it's just showing that the United States is suffering military. Our capabilities in the region are being degraded. And that wouldn't be surprising that Trump is angry all the time these days.
Record, I've heard unofficially that Trump is now angry practically all the time, that his temper has become very short, and this makes it extremely difficult for people to advise him. But anyway, it looks as if some kind of...
So I thought that was funny, and I completely believe that. I would expect him to be angry all the time these days, because things are not going his way, and he's just realized, or he's slowly realizing, that he committed political suicide when he bombed the supreme leader of Iran.
It's perhaps worth saying that the new supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Muqtada Khamenei, has now published a further statement to the Iranian people on the topic of Nowruz and on the occasion of Nowruz. And I will return to this, to the various things that he said over the course of this, rather long statement in this program. But at this point, I would just make two observations about his statement. Khamenei says in it that this current attack on Iran is the third attempt by the United States.
It is.
To achieve regime change in Iran. He says that the June 2025 war and the January protests were the first.
Both were attempts to cause regime change. Last year was Israel bombing Tehran to try to hit the leadership and cause regime change. Then the protests, that was an attempt at a color revolution that apparently Russia played a big role in helping to shut down.
First two attempts. This is the third. And he also links in this statement the very existence of Iran as a state, as a nation.
Yes, the goal of the US and Israel is to end Iran as a state, to balkanize it, to break it up into parts, so it can never be one big dangerous threat the way it is now. Imagine a country deciding it wants to break the United States apart into different states to destroy U.S. government so much that California and Texas become their own place. Yeah, that's why even Iranian protesters, a lot of them, they don't want Iran to be broken apart into states. There is nationalism in Iran. Yes, they want, to not have an oppressive theocratic regime, but they don't want Iran to be balkanized mess, which is what the United States and Israel want.
To the survival of the political system there. He obviously says an awful lot about Islam. His statement is filled with Islamic imagery, as you would expect from a member of Iran's clerical establishment. But I was struck more by the very nationalist.
Yes, it's nationalist message. And that has more appeal than the theocratic message. This is Iran's existence as a state is at risk. And it is because Israel would like nothing more than for Iran to fall apart into a messy civil war or to divide in different regions, fighting against themselves. Yeah.
The specifically nationalist, patriotic tone of this statement, which contrasts with statements that I have read of his father. And in the statement,
Incidentally, I said this the other day when Chatter came in talking about how they want to overthrow the Islamic regime. I do believe that once this conflict is over, there's a good chance there'll be reforms in Iran, and it maybe might become a little bit less theocratic. That's what I get. Especially if this new supreme leader is focusing more on nationalism rather than the theocracy. It is possible of some opening up in that direction. I wouldn't be surprised after the war is over. But I think another good news for the Iranian people is I think the way this is going to end, it's going to involve the lifting of sanctions against Iran. And so the economic situation in Iran, once this war is over and all destruction ends, might be looking a lot better than it does now.
Muqtada Khamenei says is that the ultimate objective to be achieved through regime change by the United States and Israel, their ultimate objective is to disintegrate Iran. Yep. He actually uses those words. In other words, to break up Iran. He conflates, Muqtada Khamenei conflates the survival of Iran as a state and as a nation.
It's smart wording by him because that'll have a lot more appeal to the Iranian people.
With a survival of the political system there. Now, in this, I should say, he's had massive assistance from all sorts of people in the United States and in Israel.
Yep, he's not just speaking out of his ass when he says the goal of the U.S. and Israel is to balkanize Iran.
Who have thought aloud, as you might say, about what a wonderful thing it might be if
I think even people like Asmongold, if you listen to Asmongold, he says, like, we should completely destroy Iran, well, as a threat and whatever. Yeah, that means balkanizing, disintegrating the country, basically, is what Asmongold is advocating when he says that. So, yes, and that's just one example. People in government have been saying the same thing. We need to absolutely destroy Iran. And what better to absolutely destroy a country than to balkanize it into, like, 5 smaller countries that are at odds with each other, yes. So they can never form a cohesive whole and threaten anyone else.
The Iranian government, if Iran as a state were indeed to break up, if it were to divide into its constituent parts, so that there would be a Persian-speaking rump surrounded by an independent Azerbaijan,
this right here,
Kurdistan, an independent Arabic-speaking Khuzestan in the
Turkey would hate this, having an independent Kurdistan, because they've been fighting the Kurds, Kurd independence, for decades. So to prevent that from happening, Turkey could even interfere militarily on Iran's behalf rather than let that happen. And that's, I think, another reason the Kurds were not excited to become a U.S. proxy this time, together with the recent betrayal in Syria, where we, the United States, left the Kurds to be massacred by the new ISIS Al-Qaeda leader of Syria.
oil regions of the south, a Baluchi region in the east, all of those things. Anyway, I don't myself believe that these are real practical possibilities
Here's another little fun, interesting point.
all the time. I was reading in Bloomberg that Iran, since the start of the war, has launched 3,000 missiles.
Yes, this is a very important number because 3,000 missiles was what the media was telling us Iran had before this began. Let's see. We want something like 3 weeks ago. Here we go. Iran possesses one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East, with more than 3,000 ballistic missiles, according to a 2022 estimate. So that's what we were telling everyone. Oh, they only have 3,000 missiles left. Well, they've already shot 3,000, and I don't think they're running out anytime soon.
By the way, and for the record, that is double the amount of missiles that Iran was supposed to have in its stockpiles, according to some.
Well, some said 3,000, some said even lower than that. But yes, it's Western estimates towards Iran's missile stocks were very inaccurate.
Reports I
Unfortunately.
remember reading before this current iteration of the conflict began. Larry Johnson at Sonar 21 has pointed out that the United States can have little clear understanding of how large Iran's missile stockpiles really are.
I still think they have a lot less left because they've been firing off their older missiles, their 2013 missiles so far, and they've only shot a few of their more recent, like 2020 line of missiles. So they still have, I think, it is a complete guess on my part. I think they still have probably 75 to 80% of the missiles, and those would be higher end. It's because of the rate they're firing. That'd be my guess. If they're going for a long war, that's what they have. They have they have thousands and thousands of drones, though.
Given that most of the missiles are apparently stored underground, and well, this statement from Bloomberg that the Iranians
So that's
against American bases in places like
now. This is a really interesting rumor.
Diego Garcia and southeastern Europe. I'm going to suggest that an even greater worry are rumors.
Here we go.
They are only rumors that an S-400 system has now arrived in northeastern Iran, and
That's one of Russia's best air defense systems. It's an impressive system. It can track missiles from, I think, 700 kilometers away and engage targets from 400 kilometers away. Kilometers, I think it is.
that its radars are successfully tracking F-35 and other stealth
It would explain how one of our F-35s was shot down just yesterday.
aircraft and may have played some role in the damage done to the F-35 fighter jet, which the Americans themselves have admitted to. Incidentally, there are some speculations that even though the pilot of the F-35s apparently survived and the aircraft was able to escape Iranian airspace so that its very sophisticated systems were not compromised. The aircraft itself had to conduct a hard landing, what's described as a hard landing in Saudi Arabia. In other words, it was unable to land at an airfield and crashed in the desert. Perhaps all those reports about helicopters being deployed to the
Without a doubt, yeah, it's to get the confidential U.S. military technology and recover the pilot, which is he's valuable too.
crash site were intended to retrieve the sensitive parts of the aircraft. Anyway, that the aircraft itself is a write-off. There's very little information, as one would expect, about what has happened to this F-35, and I'm not going to guess or pretend that I know more about it than I do. The point is that if the S-400 is indeed operating in northeastern Iran and is indeed successfully tracking US stealth aircraft,
Yeah, well, he'll get to it, but apparently Iranians started training last year to use this system.
then that might indeed change the picture. And that the Iranians have indeed been training on an S-400. That I know with certainty. I was provided with information about it some months ago. I spoke about how Iranian technicians started to train in Russia on operating an S-400 system. In the first half of last year, I was told by the very, very reliable source, which gave me this information, that the Russians, according to the Russians, it takes about a year for technicians, operators of an S-400, to gain sufficient knowledge to operate the system, though it would ideally require 2 years to gain full operational proficiency. Well, perhaps that year has passed. Perhaps the S-400 is now deployed on the territory of Iran, presumably in northeastern Iran, which is, I won't say it's beyond the range of American and Israeli aircraft, but it's a more difficult territory for them to reach, and it's also very mountainous and heavily forested in many places, so it would be relatively straightforward, by the way, to conceal systems there. Anyway, maybe it is operating, and there are many reports that it's...
I personally believe that, yes, it is. It's just the type of thing Russia would do at this point. If they wanted to show their support for Iran, and if they have, like you said, been training on it, of course, this makes sense.
Radars do have...
After all the shit we've pulled in Ukraine, I'm sure there are those within Russia that have been chomping at the bits to deploy the S-400 in Iran to cause us misery too.
Certain capability to track stealth aircraft, perhaps not fully so, but at least to some degree. To repeat again, I am not a technical expert in these questions, but anyway, even a limited capability to track and engage stealth aircraft is going to be a serious matter for the Israelis and for the Americans, and it is going to further limit their ability to conduct operations.
So the air bases close to Iran are now getting damaged to the point they're no longer usable. So U.S. being forced back to bases even farther away. And at the same time, Iran is a very, very, very good chance they just had a huge upgrade to their air defense. So when people tell you, oh, well, the U.S. is winning this war, we've won this war, that's not what it's looking like.
Inside Iran itself. One thing I'm absolutely sure, there is going to be much discussion, much debate, much worry and concern within the American and Israeli military leaderships about how it was that Iran was able to engage with an F-35. There will be many people who will ask how it happened. Was it due to pilot error? Was there some mistake made? Or does Iran now have a capability that went previously unsuspected? And could it be that that capability is connected to the supply of the S-400, perhaps in combination with the very long-range radars, early warning radars, which Iran has apparently received from China.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I've heard those reports of some very sophisticated radars from China. So, with those radars being able to detect stealth U.S. stealth aircrafts reliably, and then passing that information on to an S-400 system, that'd be a pretty effective way to counter the F-35. And on that note, I thought it'd be fun to just stop right here and watch a video on the S-400 missile system, because haven't watched a in-depth video on it, and I'm curious. It's from 3 years ago.
We must comprehend the components of the S-400 equipment in order to understand how it functions as a whole system. A typical S-400 system consists of 6 parts: a launch vehicle with missiles, command and control post located on a vehicle, a long-range surveillance radar known as Big Bird Acquisition and Management Radar, a Gravestone Engagement and Fire Control Radar, an All-Altitude Acquisition Radar, and last but not the least, a mobile mast system. Let's go over each of these parts in more detail. The missile's one of the most important elements of the S-400 Triumph. This is the launch vehicle that carries the missiles. This is the Baz tractor truck, a launch vehicle that carries these missiles. Another alternative is the MAZ series. Transporter Erector Launcher Vehicle is the platform for the SP launchers. Up to 4
You can see with all these different vehicles and parts of the system why it takes a year to learn.
launch tubes housing a variety of missiles can fit inside the TL truck. These are the 4 missiles of different range and caliber. This is a short-range missile of 40 kilometers. This is a medium-range missile of 120 kilometers. Moving forward, this is a long-range missile of 250 kilometers. Last but not the least, we have the very long-range missile of 400 kilometers.
Yeah, like I said, it can intercept planes 400 kilometers away.
For basic understanding, there are 3 types of radar system of the S-400 missile system. Number 1, the Big Bird. NATO reporting name Tombstone. The 91N6E Big Bird
Notice this is a mobile system. Unlike the radar system that Iran has destroyed throughout the Gulf, this is on a truck, and it can be relocated so as to make it harder to destroy.
Acquisition and battle management radar of the S-400 is based on the 8x8 trailer. The radar can detect and track aircraft, rotorcraft, cruise missiles, guided missiles, drones, and ballistic rockets within the distance of 600 kilometers.
600, I'd heard 700, but 600 is very impressive.
It can simultaneously track up to 300 targets, which makes it as one of the most advanced mobile radars. Number 2. This is the
Mobile radar.
Air control and target tracking radar of the S-400. NATO codename is called Gravestone. It is a multifunctional radar with a range of 400 kilometers. It can also be referred as an all-altitude detector. Number 3. This is the 40V6MR. This radar is used to detect low-flying targets, which are using terrain masking to hide from radar. But some say the 40V6 is not a radar, but an optional tower, which could be detached from chassis and mounted on the tower by crane. This is the Ural truck. It is mounted with a mobile command and control post for the S-400 system. From here,
A mobile command center. All of this is mobile, and so the technicians running all this are in this truck. Then you have drivers, and so they can quickly relocate this if they need to. And I'm sure they do relocate this because when you use radars to scan the skies, you can be seen. It's like it's announcing your location. Like there are missiles that specific type of missiles that home in on radar signals and are used to take out exactly radar systems like this. Forget the U.S. has a specific line of missiles just for that purpose. That's why having mobile system it's very important, because if they detect one of those missiles coming in to attack one of these radar systems and it's homing in on the radar, they can turn the radar off and then drive the truck like a short distance away, and the missile will lose its target.
All operations will be managed, from the detection of the target through the firing of missiles from the launchers. Let us look at the basic step-by-step process of how this works. Step number 1. Big Bird long-range surveillance radar picks up a target which have been discussed it can track as many as 300 targets at once. Step number 2. It then passes the information to the command and control station. When determining whether a target is friendly or hostile, the command and control center is involved. Additionally, it chooses to engage the target or receives orders.
Now, apparently, the radar they got from China has even greater range than this 600 kilometers, and it's excellent at tracking stealth aircrafts. Now, if that radar system alerts the S-400 that there is this plane incoming on this vector, and they know where to look, they can track it better, even if it is stealth, and have a higher chance of shooting it down.
From higher command theater to do so. The command and control center orders the launchers to launch the appropriate missile after permission to engage has been granted. Step number 3. The type of missiles are launched depending on the range and type of targets. The system works by launching 2 missiles at the same target if one missed. The backup missile will do the job. Step number 4. These are guided to the target using the engagement radar. The engagement radar and surveillance radar constantly interact with each other to determine the trajectory of the missiles based on the real-time location of the target. Step number 5. In case there are low-flying targets, the mobile mast system is the last defense equipment, which it could track cruise missile and other UAV. The command post ordered the launch of the mid-range missiles and destroy the target. At a time, the system could track up to 300 targets and engage around 60 to 80 targets at once. It can guide up to 160 missiles simultaneously, keeping in mind it required 2 missiles to hit a single target as their battle regiment strategy. Again, it would not be honest if we cannot discuss its limitations and drawbacks, so here are the basic analysis. Although the S-400 might be deadly in the event of a poorly prepared attack, its maximum range may be influenced by the other weapons that its operators choose to deploy in addition to the system. One of the limitations of the S-400 is the Earth's curvature, which restricts radar project.
This impacts all radar systems. The Earth's curvature is a hard limit to radar, because if you're here, if you're flying here, hidden by the Earth, radars won't detect you.
To the horizon. Therefore, it's possible that very low-flying things like cruise missiles or even aircraft won't be discovered until they are close enough to the system to strike it. This range could be as little as 40 kilometers at low altitude. At AI Tele, we produce military engineering videos, so smash the...
Okay, so I thought that would be a fun little video to learn about the S-400 series. But from what I'm hearing also, it only shows these four components, but I believe that there's several of these trucks. There's one of each radar, yes, but they have several of these trucks. That's how they can launch, like, I think 6. I think they have 6 of the missile trucks in one of these S-400 units. And that makes sense. So you can engage multiple targets, because there's only 4 tubes on one truck. And they have the capacity to guide 60 missiles at once. You need more than one truck for that. So I'll just throw that in there. Next, let's talk about Kharg Island and Trump's wonderful decision to go after that.
To develop in the United States, advocated by people like Lindsey Graham, that seizing Kharg Island will somehow precipitate a huge crisis in Iran.
It's wishful thinking on Trump's part. He knows he's trapped in this quagmire. By now, he must understand the risk of how this could destroy his presidency. And this is his Hail Mary pass. What he desperately wants to work so that he can get out of this crisis. I don't think it'll work, but we'll see.
And that it will force the Iranians, the shock of losing Kharg Island, and the ability to export oil, will shock the Iranians into some kind of capitulation
Yep.
of the sort that the United States wants. And of course,
You heard those comments from anonymous insiders of the administration. Yeah, that's exactly the thinking.
Donald Trump himself apparently has been harping on about Kharg Island, going all the way back to the 1980s, when apparently he first started to talk about this issue then. Now, I have to say, based on the comments that the Iranians themselves are making, I think that this is another massive miscalculation.
I agree. You've actually heard the Iranian president saying, "We welcome ground forces. We want them." They probably had. You look at all the long range, I mean, really long range drones they're using into the Gulf. I guarantee you they have short range drones. And they have a network of fortification built into all the mountains throughout the region, and including Kharg Island itself. And the instant we start trying to land Marines on Kharg Islands, there's suddenly going to be a swarm of drones that take off from underground bunkers. Just pop out of the ground and just start raining down on the Marines. That's what I predict is going to happen, because now we live in the era of drone warfare, and Iran's ally Russia is very familiar with it, and they've had time to share that expertise. And U.S. forces, I have not yet ever operated under the reality of drone warfare, and I think there'll be mass casualties on the U.S. side, unfortunately. It's going to be bad. But I think it's going to happen because Trump doing nothing is handing Iran victory. They'll just keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, and it'll cost the Republicans the midterms, and Trump will get impeached. It's regime change in the United States. We're on current course for regime change in the United States. Isn't that funny? Trump bombs the supreme leader of Iran, and now it's more likely that there's regime change in the United States than there is in Iran. Actually, I say it's nearly guaranteed in the United States, because there's no off-ramp to this thing.
I've already spoken about how Kharg Island itself could easily become a military trap for whatever US military force is sent to capture and occupy it. But there is something else that I think American planners, assuming that there are any, and assuming that they are being listened to, are failing to take into account. Given that the Iranians apparently fear that any kind of truce is simply going to lead to further future attacks
It will.
upon them, which would result.
Netanyahu, well, he might be dead. That's a different story. But Netanyahu has been after Iran for 40 years. And there are a lot of bloodthirsty people in Israel that want to go after Iran. And there are bloodthirsty people in the United States that want to go after Iran. And those people aren't going away. So, yes, a ceasefire is just that, a ceasefire, a temporary pausing of hostilities until the United States can build up another good stockpile of weapons and interceptors and defenses. And then when we feel we're ready, and when Israel has some good intelligence, we'll go in and bomb the supreme leader again. And if we keep trying at regime change this way, maybe one time it'll work, right?
In the collapse of the existing political system and ultimately the disintegration of Iran. Given that the Iranians assess the stakes so high, why would they agree to stop simply because Kharg Island has been captured?
Rather, this would be an opportunity for them to kill a huge number of Americans. I mean, apparently it's 1,500 Marines is what's currently being deployed to the region. It might be more, because there's reports that I'll get to that 1 month is the time frame before this operation to take Kharg Island will be ready. So they might be bringing more Marines from somewhere else, so it might be more. But whatever, if it's 1,500 or 3,000, well, that's 3,000 Americans right within the firing distance of Iran's coast. Let's look at that again. Kharg Island, right here, like 20 miles away. Small drones even can reach this place. You have artillery, you have all the big rockets. They have endless different supplies of ammunition. Hey, hell, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a tunnel connecting Karg Island to the mainland. That, considering how much Iranians love tunnels, that's a very big possibility. And you have this island next to it. I'm sure that's honeycombed and with military bases and underground stuff too. And just one bunker with drone operators. That it probably won't be one bunker. It'll probably be like 50 bunkers with drone operators just waiting to deploy their small drones to go after U.S. Marines. And it'll be a massacre. It's by the way, I think we can take Karg Island with 3,000 Marines, or maybe more than that, but whatever. I'm fairly certain that the U.S. will take Karg Island. There'll be huge losses. But what happens after that is you still have this island over here that can be shooting drones. You have drones incoming from the mainland. I don't think you can hold Karg Island. That's the thing. We can't hold, like, those 3,000 Marines, whatever are left after we get Karg Island. They're just going, unless we start sending hundreds of troops there, or even thousands of troops there every month, we're not going to be holding Karg Island. Everyone there all the Marines there will get destroyed. And so that's what I think will happen. Iranians, rather than negotiating to open the Strait of Hormuz, will just say, oh, great, now we have target practice. Marines that we can shoot at, and an endless amount of valid U.S. military personnel that we can target at close range. Yeah, that's what they're going to think. But let's continue this.
For the moment, Iran is able to maintain a financial flow by exporting oil. And the United States has said that it's not going to interfere in.
On that note, since the start of the conflict, Iran has exported more oil than it did before the conflict. That is the current situation, because their tankers can still go through the Gulf of Hormuz. And Trump is leaving them alone because the oil markets are so tight that if he stops, for one, there'd be all types of political and legal implications to trying to stop the tankers of other nations. Like you have a Japanese tanker full of oil heading to Japan that is desperate for oil. It's not going to look good if the United States tries to stop that tanker of oil. So there's that aspect. And there's also, he recognizes that every bit of oil that reaches the global markets is good at this point. However, it does mean that right now Iran is making buckets of money, because it's essentially cut off the oil from everywhere else in the Gulf, all this region, for 20% of the world's oil, and only its oil can go out. And so it's selling its oil at like 50% more right now. And it's selling more of it. So right now, Iran is awash with cash. For the moment, if we take Karg Island here, that'll stop or slow down significantly. However, that might not be an issue. He'll discuss it and I'll comment on it too.
Iran's export trade, it's actually issued a statement, a decision.
But all the oil that they've exported in the last 3 weeks has given them a buffer at very least, even if we do take Karg Island.
Saying that Iranian oil, which is at sea, is not subject to sanctions. Another admission of the enormous economic pressure that the United States and its allies are under in light of the closure, or at least the Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz and the actions that the Iranians are taking there. But let's say Karg Island is captured. Let's say the Iranians aren't able to export energy any further. Would that in itself lead to the collapse of the political system in Iran?
No, it would not. Just look at Ukraine's economy is essentially collapsed. Now, they don't have power in most of the countries. Like, they only have power like 4 hours a day, most countries. So all industrial production is practically gone down to zero. And basically they have a huge outflow of their working force fleeing the war, and young men fleeing the war. And any young men that are still in the country are being rounded up and sent out to the front line via forced conscriptions. So you just don't have a functioning economy in Ukraine anymore. But Ukraine is continuing to survive thanks to foreign funding from now just the EU. Before it was from the US and the EU, but now from just the EU. And so foreign funding can keep a country going even when its economy has stopped functioning because of war. And that's going to be the situation with Iran. I am sure that China and Russia will step in and do what is necessary to keep supplies and funds flowing to keep Iran going. By the way, I will add this right here. It's a good time to show you this. This is a convoy of trucks heading from Tajikistan to Iran. Come on. Load. There we go.
با دستور پرزیدنت جمهوری تاجیکستان پیشوای ملت محترم امام علی رحمان با مردم دوست و برادر جمهوری اسلامی ایران کمک بشردوستانه ارسال گردید. یاری بشردوستانه تاجیکستان در حجم 3610 تن بار از جمله از 45 تن دارواری.
Just an endless, look at how long that is, endless convoy of trucks with Iranian flags heading towards Iran. And so, and where this convoy is coming from, Tajikistan or Turkestan, I think it's this here, right here, Turkestan. So all these trucks coming in from the north. And coincidentally, apparently, you have the Russian air defense system active in this part of the country, protecting these supplies coming in from Russia, and I'm sure China too.
I am unable to see why. The point is that Iran would be at war. It would have part of its territory, Kharg Island, occupied by an invader who the Iranian people are being told, and who many of those people no doubt believe, is seeking the disintegration of Iran.
Many people in Israel and the United States, politicians, are openly declaring that and hoping for that, the disintegration of Iran. So it makes complete sense for them to believe that's the U.S.'s aim.
Sure.
It certainly is Israel's aim.
In that case, the Iranians will do something completely different. They will move towards a full mobilization, war economy.
Yep.
In which there would be centralized control of supplies and allocation of resources.
Yep.
Greater reliance on economic aid provided by key strategic allies like
China and Russia will provide whatever financing is needed, and already Iran's built up a nice little buffer in all the oil exports it's just done in the last 3 weeks.
China and Russia, and which would almost by definition require less capital inflow than a civilian economy would do. And given the creation of that kind of economy, one could see that that kind of economy would actually strengthen the current political system.
Like it's done in Ukraine.
Still further. And that many of the key players within that system would in that case probably link the preservation of the political system in Iran to the continued operation of the Iranian economy in exactly that form. So at that point, the calculation might be, let's keep the war going, because we have a mobilization economy, with a war economy if you prefer, and we also, as a result, have a stable political system. The worst possible decision would be to agree a truce.
Yeah, that's what Trump is hunting for. To agree to a truce from a position of weakness, saying, oh no, you've taken Kharg Island, no, please, we'll give up our nuclear program and everything, and we'll open Strait of Hormuz, just give us back Kharg Island. No, that would be a disaster for Iran. They will never do that. They know they have Trump over a barrel. All they have to do is stay the course, keep Hormuz closed, and Trump will end up impeached. Democrats will win Congress, and Trump will be impeached. They have the opportunity to cause regime change in the United States. To actually, what cost could they inflict that would be more meaningful than that? If they want to create a deterrent, so no U.S. president ever thinks about killing Iran's supreme leader, what better way to do that than to hold the Strait of Hormuz closed until Trump ends up impeached? That would be the single best way to set up deterrence. And that's, I'm sure, what many in Iran are thinking right now.
To end the war, but to leave the United States in control of Harg Island, preventing Iran from exporting oil, making it impossible for...
Oh yes, that would be even worse. I agree. If they agree to a ceasefire with United States in control of Karg Island, like, no. I would assume that any ceasefire opening the Strait of Hormuz would be exchanged for getting back control of Karg Island. That'll never happen. They agree to a ceasefire with United States in control of Karg Island.
A civilian economy in Iran to function, and in that case, perhaps causing an economic crisis, which might undermine, finally, the stability of the political system and of the entire regime. So capturing Harg Island might not actually force the Iranians to seek peace.
No, as long as they've got the partners in Russia and China, and Russia is making bank with the high oil prices, so they can afford to send a little bit Iran's way. And China, of course, is an economic powerhouse. With these two backing Iran, the oil from the straits that they're exporting right now from Karg Island, that's a bonus. But with its two powerful partners ready to back it, Iran could keep going even without its oil exports.
It would give the Iranian leadership a further reason to continue the war, so that when the war ended, the Americans were obliged to leave Harg Island because the war had ended in an Iranian strategic victory. Well, that seems to me a logical calculation, and it's the kind of calculation which I wonder whether people in the United States are making, whether even now they understand the sort of calculations.
No, you have wishful thinking going on in the United States. Wishful thinking led to the strike against the supreme leader. It's just, we'll kill him and then it'll be regime change in 48 hours. That was the wishful thinking that got us into this war. And now practically the Trump administration is running on wishful thinking that somehow they can take Karg Island and force an end to this conflict that is wrecking Trump's political career. But no, that won't work.
And ideas that are being made in Tehran. And coming back to that statement by the current supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, what do I in fact find to develop?
And this is Alexander's opinion on what the United States should do.
In the United States, advocated by people like Lindsey Graham, that seizing Harg Island will somehow precipitate a huge crisis in Iran, and that it will force the Iranians, the shock of losing Harg Island and the ability to export oil will shock the Iranians into some kind of capitulation of the sort that the United States wants. And of course, Donald Trump himself apparently has been harping on about Harg Island.
Sorry, this is not the right... The section I'm taking video is further on.
The next meeting of the Americans and the Ukrainians. They're not sending a delegation to it. They're leaving the Americans and the Ukrainians to talk to each other. One wonders about what and to what. Continue to try to harass the Russians. Still seizing Shadow. Will receive naval escorts, tankers from this. They came to Moscow back in to discuss the situation on the battlefields in Ukraine today. There are rumors that another big Russian missile.
Okay, so that particular link that I had set up isn't going to be good. So let's go on to. I'm just going to mention this quickly that this is important that
It's to pay Iran in.
Japan has agreed to pay Iran in Chinese yuan. And I think this is... I don't know if this is oil exports from other places. I think this is for Iran's oil export. And Japan has agreed to buy Iranian oil in Chinese yuan. And that is a huge direct challenge to the dollar. That's definitely not what the U.S. deep state wanted. And it's going to put more pressure on the dollar hegemony. So I thought that would be fun. It's in the middle of the war. It's not game changing right now. It's just something to keep in mind. How this conflict ends out playing out, the end game of this conflict, that's a much bigger deal. Whether buying oil in yuan is going to be a new feature of the Gulf post this crisis, that is important, but we aren't near there yet. Also, this isn't the video I wanted to watch, but I just mentioned I would highlight that also Tim Pool, one of the big commentators on YouTube, one of his recent videos, he was openly questioning, here's Tim Pool, whether the U.S. dollar hegemony was over. So that's a big deal. Like a mainstream conservative commentator speaking about maybe the U.S.'s role as a superpower of the world is coming to an end. So it is, by the way. I'll just say that. But it's going to go... It's not going to be a peaceful end. I'll get into that right now with this last video.
If you were the commander-in-chief of the United States, what would you do at this point, as of today?
Commander-in-chief meaning Donald Trump?
Yeah. You get to make the decision. What does America do next if it's acting in its own interest, if it's trying to preserve its power and wealth? At this point, what does it do?
This is going to be an example of naivety, unfortunately. I'll comment on why in a second.
Well, first of all, I would acknowledge that all these events are interconnected, right? So this trade war of China,
Yes.
this war in Ukraine, this war in the Middle East, it's all interconnected because the American empire is too overstretched and it
Absolutely.
has its fingers on everything. And so it allows its enemies to provoke it into these never-ending wars. So
the enemy isn't provoking the United States into these never-ending wars. It's the United States that is, in an effort to maintain its hegemony, starting these never-ending wars. It's not... Iran didn't provoke the United States into striking supreme leader. It was doing everything it possible to negotiate, and yeah, it didn't do it. And in Ukraine, it's the West that did the maiden coup back in 2014, then built huge fortifications in the eastern part of Ukraine to get ready to fight Russia. They basically turned all of Ukraine into a weapon to bash Russia with. That was the goal. And so it's not Iran and Russia and China that are starting these conflicts. It's Iran, Russia, and China are islands outside the U.S. financial, economic, and military dominance of the world. They are adversaries. They're not part of our system. They don't keep all their reserves in U.S. dollars. They are opposition, and we are confronting them. We are trying to stamp out opposition to our dominance over the globe. And because our financial system and funding our deficit depends on having every other country in the world basically finance our deficit. If there starts being countries that don't do that, everything collapses.
I would do is basically sit down everyone, okay, including Russia, China, Iran, and say, it's time for a new world order where
this will happen, but the United States won't agree to it willingly.
We are partners in this relationship, right? Before America was the hegemon, before the US dollar was the world reserve currency.
Yep.
But now what we want to do is open a dialogue where everyone is respected, where America is no longer the bully, but a willing partner in creating a new economic order that benefits everyone and not just a few.
Okay, it sounds nice, and it would be lovely if you could do that, but it's not possible. It's just not possible. because the entire U.S. financial system, and it's huge, rests on the dollar's continued dominance of the world. What he just described, a world where the dollar isn't the sole reserve currency, where the United States isn't the sole superpower, that's a world where the U.S. financial system completely disintegrates. And I mean, like, the impact should be like the end of finance. It couldn't, like, one impact, collapse of the treasury market, collapse of the financial system, and the inability of the United States to fund itself through deficit spending anymore. No one will lend us money because it'll be the dollar's collapse will be so great that, yeah, no one will trust us, and our financial system is up in smoke. It's going to be what happened to Weimar Germany, hyperinflation, because that's what happens if the U.S.'s dominance of the world ends. There's no easy way out. The U.S. economy, no, sorry, not the U.S. economy. U.S. financial system is a Ponzi scheme with a treasury as the asset underlying it, this Ponzi scheme. When that goes down, it takes everything with it. And stock market too. It's the lot of lending of stocks and treasury used as collateral. So in nearly every public company, you have more people thinking they own that stock than there are actually of that stock existing. They have voting mechanisms that adjust voting down in, like, corporate voting, so that like, you have 3 times the number of shares in votes coming in. They adjust that down. And if the treasury market collapses, it'd be like game of musical chairs in the stock market. Some people will end up with a stock, and the other people end up with treasury collateral that's worthless. And so, oh my God, it'll be such a mess. It'll be drastic cuts to Social Security because there's just no way to fund it, because our entire economy is based on borrowing. And we've let our manufacturing and farming and productive sectors of the economy wither away. And it'll be one of the greatest economic shocks known to mankind, what will happen, unfortunately. And so that's what I mean, that this nice little transition to a multipolar world order cannot happen because the dollar will collapse. Without everyone in the world funding our deficit, we are drowning in debt in the United States, the treasury market. We can't, it'll collapse and take down the financial system with it. So there is no off-ramp for the United States from these wars stuff. It's a desperate attempt by those in power in the United States to reestablish U.S. dominance, to take if they manage to balkanize Russia and Iran and basically make them puppet states like some in the United States want to do, that might give us another 10 years. 10 years of the U.S. financial system surviving. And considering I think we have 5 years left at this point, so 15 years. We could get 15 more years of life in the financial system if we took down Iran and Russia. But I see no way of that happening. It's basically, it's desperation from behind the scenes in the deep state. The people that know the real situation going on in financial markets and the dollar, desperately trying to reestablish flows into the U.S. financial system from the Middle East, because more and more countries are trading in yuan, from like oil in yuan, or oil in the Russian ruble, and they want to put an end to that, but they can't.
I think that's the wisest possible advice and probably the only path that preserves civilization.
Unfortunately, Tucker Carlson, like I just outlined, it's not possible. It's just nobody understands how much of the U.S. financial system is a Ponzi scheme. And it's something I'm going to have to go into on other streams. The old research from when I was at Market Skeptics and how I went into all this, and just how brittle our financial system has become, and how everything is backed by U.S. Treasuries. How if you go and buy commodities, your money ends up in U.S. Treasuries. You go to buy gold in like ETF, like GLD, your money ends up in U.S. Treasuries. You buy stock again through any prime dealer, your money is going to end up in Treasuries most likely. That is what's the way it's working right now. The entire U.S. financial system is like a bucket shop, that doesn't have anything to do with the underlying. Money just goes in. It's like, or better, a Ponzi scheme. As long as the inflows are greater than outflows, it continues to work. But if it starts to become a multipolar world and there's like, let's say world central banks decide to diversify their assets out of the US dollar, oh my God, it'll be collapse more spectacular than anything we've ever seen in modern times. Anyway, I think I'm going to end this here for now. This will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.